presentation today will be in English because we have colleagues for native language. The topic of today is public-private partnerships in real estate. Who knows what are PPPs? Please raise your hands. Any previous experiences? You know what are PPPs? Who thinks PPPs are complex? Complex, something very hard. You feel it is very, very difficult. The objective, my main goal today is to simplify PPPs. I want everyone, after this workshop, to become an expert in PPPs. I am not an expert in PPP. Well, I did not learn it from theory. Well, I don't want to teach it to you through theory. I want to simplify it. I want to share my experiences with you. I had the opportunity to work with A'mar Economic City. I was the investment director to develop a city, 168 million square meters of land from scratch. I had the opportunity to be exposed to more than 12 sectors and asset classes. Whether it is a port, aluminium smelter, industrial zone, education, healthcare, power plant, water plant, you name it, we were responsible of developing these. A'mar had 5 billion riyals of equity. However, our 5-year business plan required 55 billion to develop the sub-asset classes and sectors that I've talked about. So there was no way to develop the city without going to the private sector. So I learned it on the ground, practically. And this is what I'm trying to share with you today. So the agenda of today, we will talk about the objectives of this session. Then I'll give you some background about what's happening in the market in Saudi Arabia. Then we'll talk about PPPs, understanding what are PPPs and explaining them. We will discuss some of the most common PPP structures in real estate. Where do we apply them? Then we will talk about the PPP standard process. What are the phases of a PPP? Last but not least, the lessons learned. The objectives of this session, first, I want to ask the question is, why do we need PPPs? Why PPPs are important? What are PPPs? Okay, we will try to answer the second question also. How can we apply PPPs in real estate? And what are the key lessons learned? So some background. You all know about there is white land taxes. We need to increase Saudi ownership. There is need for housing projects. There's large mega projects being developed around Saudi Arabia. Budgets, government budgets are under pressure. It's not unlimited. We need to attract foreign investors. Governments are sitting with large portfolios of land with minimal budget. They cannot develop. So all of these, you have the Vision 2030. There is a PPP policy being reviewed and maybe being shared shortly. So all of these challenges and everything happening in Saudi Arabia. Why do we need PPPs? In the past, 10 years ago, The government used to do economic and market studies. If I want to build a road or a project, we do the economic and market study. Do I need it or not? Then I go directly and do the technical design and cost estimates of the project. Previously, 10 years ago, the funds are available. And they tender the project through an EPC, engineer, procure, and construct project, directly to the contractor. There was no challenges at that time. However, today, funds and budgets are not available. Or if available, they are limited. This is why we need structuring options. We need to think of other ways of financing our projects. And this is why we have to consider now funds, JVs, or PPPs. This is a must. We are embarking on Vision 2030. Most of the strategies that I have seen in the market, they assume 70% of the financing comes from PPPs. 70%. 30% is from equity. And we're talking about the giga projects, all of the giga projects, 70%. So we need to understand what is PPP. 70% of the financing is coming from PPP. If I cannot structure it through PPP, we have a huge problem. What are public-private partnerships? Any contractual agreement between the private sector and the private sector, public and private sector, is a PPP. Any contractual agreement. It shouldn't be the BOTs or BOOs and what have you. It could be any simple agreement. This is a PPP. The private investor commits to provide a service that used to be provided by the government. It could be maintenance. It could be operations. It could be a management contract. This is a PPP also. The ultimate goal of a PPP is value for money. Core principles of a PPP, and this is, I think if we understand this, we can understand any PPP structure and how to structure a PPP, is the risk allocation between the parties. And we will define these risks. But this is the core principle. Redistribution of the risks to the party that best manages this risk. I cannot give the private sector, for example, demand risk if he cannot manage this demand risk. For example, in power projects, when you get a private sector to build a power plant, he has no control on the demand. The electricity should be distributed to the houses, right? To the regions. So in that case, demand risk is on the government, and usually the government signs an offtake agreement with the private sector to cover the demand. They are the best to manage this risk. Benefits of PPP. There are several benefits of a PPP. Risk allocation, improved service quality, because usually the private sector have better efficiencies, on-time delivery, there's no time creeps, faster implementation, cost-effective, access to expertise, and most important is the financing source. Risk categories. These are the main risk categories. Definitely there are multiples, but I'm concentrating on the most important risk categories. There is the design risk. When we are designing the project, who is responsible to design the project? Then you have the construction risk. Who will construct the project? Whether the private sector or the government. There is the financing risk. After we have designed it, we need to finance the project. Who will finance the project? Demand market risk is one of the most important risks. Who will manage the demand risk? Quality risk, management risk, operational risk, residual value risk. What is the value of the asset at the end of the contractual agreement? In this graph, I like it. Here we present the types of PPP models and structures from the most simple, lowest risk to the private sector to the most complex. And as you see, a PPP contract could start with operation and maintenance, as is the case in the metro. The government built the metro, owns the metro, but they bring a company to operate and maintain the metro. This company is only taking operation and maintenance risk. Another type, and we will talk into these agreements or sample agreements, is the lease agreement. Lease agreement is a contractual agreement between the private sector and the government, whereby the private sector comes, leases the land for a fixed fee. The private sector designs, constructs, and builds the project and takes market risk and operates the project until you have the build, own, operate, and privatization. These are the most complex, whereby you are shifting most of the risks to the private sector. Well, these are examples of how we are allocating the risks among the PPP structures. If we look at the operation and maintenance, you see operation risk is borne by the private sector. The quality risk is borne by the private sector. However, management, demand risk, investment, residual, construction, and design risk is borne by the government. If we go to the leasing, well, this is the simplest type of contracts. And actually, it is implemented widely in Saudi Arabia, whereby the government is shifting most of the risks from the government to the private. In a leasing, the operation, quality, management, demand market risks, investment and financing, construction and design are shifted to the private sector. The government only takes the asset at the end of the lease term. So one of the, I think, widely used PPP contracts that we see in front of us. So how can we apply PPPs in the real estate sector? Here I'm giving some examples. Operation and maintenance. Again, we discussed in an operation and maintenance, only the operation and quality risk is allocated to the private sector. All other risks are borne by the government sector. Explain it in a diagram. You have the real estate project. The private sector operates and manages the real estate project. The government designs, constructs, and owns the project. In terms of payments, the government pays an operation and maintenance fees to the real estate project. The private sector receives the operation and maintenance fee. Government receives the income from the real estate project. It's not the private sector. Some of the examples where we see this being applied is residential compounds, whereby the government owns the residential compound, but it gets a private sector to operate and maintain, facility management and whatever. Office park, also we see it. The entire project and asset is owned by the government, and then the government gets a private sector to operate and maintain. Operation and management, and this is also we see it widely used. In an operation and management, operation and management risks, operation quality and management risks, there's a typo here, are borne by the private sector, whereas the other risks are borne by the government. Here, similarly, the real estate project is owned by the government. The government pays operation and management fees to the private sector. The private sector receives the operation and management fees. The government receives the income from the project. Here you see it mainly with hotels and hospitals. You see the Sheratons, Hiltons. They do operation and management. So we see it in hotels, and hospitals also come in. Also we see it. We bring the big brands of hotels to operate and manage our hospitals, Johns Hopkins and what have you. Development management. This is what the ACOMs, Atkins, Parsons do. They take only development management risk, whereby the entire risks are owned and being allocated to the government, where the government pays a development management fee to the real estate project, and the private sector receives the development management fees. Here we see it in large master plans and infrastructure projects, where we bring these management consultants or project management consultants to manage the project on our behalf. Design, build, and I'll go very quickly. The lease. Lease, again, one of maybe the easiest to apply, easiest to implement in Saudi Arabia. Most of the risks are allocated to the private sector. The only risk that remains with the government is the residual value. In a lease, the real estate project is owned and designed and constructed and financed and operated by the private sector. Private sector receives income from the operation of the real estate project. Private sector pays a lease fixed fee to the government. So we see it also with commercial projects and mixed-use lands. JV is a structure whereby both the private sector and the government shares most risks. So the project, the government transfers ownership of land to the JV. The JV is a shareholding between the government and the private sector. They both designs, constructs, and operate the project. They both are required to finance the project. PPP process, very quickly. So the PPP process is divided into the pre-procurement stage, where we prepare for the project. We procure the lead financial advisor. We do the data collection and site assessments. We do the market study, the feasibility study, and the financial model. Then we do the risk identification. Again, this is an integral part of the analysis. We do the PPP structuring, needs and options analysis based on the risk allocation again. Last but not least, we engage the legal and technical consultants. Procurement stage is when we move into the talking to investors. We start talking to the bidders. We do the pre-qualification. We develop the tender documents or the RFPs. We start the bidding process. We receive the proposals. We do evaluation. We do negotiation and financial close. So this is the second phase, procurement stage. The third stage is after we sign a contract with the private sector, we do contract management, or contract amendments and issue resolving. Last but not least, at the end of the expiry of the contract, we hand back the asset to the government. PPP lessons learned, and these are the cream of the cream from what we experienced. PPPs are specific. There's no quick fix. There's no one standard process or one standard risk allocation that fits all. And they take a long time. It's not something quickly you can apply. It's not free money. Unfortunately, through my interactions with clients, some of the clients, they think, this is free money. I need to take most advantage from the investor. It's not free money. The investor is there to make money. The success of the investor is your success. So you need to compensate the investor according to the risks that he is taking. The more risks the private investor or the government takes, the more you need to compensate the party. Risks, the more risk, the more money you need to pay. You need to enter with a win-win mindset. It's not an arbitration. It's a win-win, trustworthy partnership. If your partner succeeds, you will succeed. If he fails, you will fail with him. Demand risk, in my opinion, remains the biggest challenge. Through our experience, we see the power projects, the water projects, sewage treatment projects, all succeed. Why do they succeed? It's easier to structure. Because there are offtake agreements. Whereas in real estate, we find it more challenging because the government usually, and that's widely and mostly used, they ask the private sector to take the demand risk. I have this land, come build it, and you have to lease it. I don't give him an offtake agreement. Whereas in the other projects, offtake agreements are signed from day one. By having an offtake agreement, this is bankable. You could go to a bank and secure a loan based on the offtake agreements. Most importantly, you need to prepare, then prepare. It's not something straightforward. Preparation is key in PPPs. And this is why we have this first phase where we are structuring the deal, where we are doing the feasibilities, we are doing the risk allocation, understanding which party can take control and manage the respective risks. This is very important before going into the bidding stage. You cannot go into the bidding stage without preparing and understanding the deal structure. Thank you very much. And if you have any questions, تفضل.
How do you classify the government? Like a company that is 100% owned by the ministry or by the government? Is it considered as a government or public or it's private?
A very nice question. PPPs, what I described here, applies to governments, quasi-governments, يلي هن 50% owned by government and 50% private, or master developers. I started my presentation, and my experience is from a master developer. It's not a government. It's zero owned by government. Amar Economic City is publicly listed. And what I was trying to share with you is the principles of PPP. How to deal between a master developer and a sub-developer, or a government and a private sector. Whether it is 100% government or maybe only 30% government with another entity. Okay, so it applies all throughout. The core principle is risk allocation. And these are the models that you have seen. And it could be applied whether with a master developer or a government. And you said, and usually it's always complicated. It's not always. Some of them, I agree with you, are BOTs. I agree with you. Some of them are the privatization. And here, yes, you go into the details and the risk allocation and the legalities and how to structure them. There are certain complex ones. But at the end of the day, if you understand risk allocation and how to allocate the risk to the respective party and compensate him accordingly, you will be able to structure it. But كمان, look at the easier ones. Operation and maintenance or operation and management. These are simple ones that we are exercising them now. Widely, we do them everywhere. These are PPPs. Another one, lease contract. Most amanas and baladiyas, all of their faras, all of their investment opportunities are based on lease. By doing the lease, the government is off-taking most of the risks to the government, to the private sector, in a simple contract. The only downside of a lease, the government does not have the upside potential. They are receiving a fixed amount. If the project is very successful, it all goes to the private sector. But it's okay. The private sector assumed all risks. It's okay that he makes a lot of money. He took all of the risk. He took the demand risk also.
They don't give it to you. They put a base lease, and then there's a premium on performance or something. This is the
Again, preparation. This, phase one, the deal structuring, the PPP options analysis, here where we decide with the government or with the client whether we do it as fixed lease only or we do lease and revenue share. This is where we are structuring it. You need to attract investors. If the land is prime and already the investors are secured, it's okay to have this revenue share. But in other situations, it's only a lease. But all apply. You could have only the simple lease or lease plus revenue share. But once you go into the revenue share, you're complicating it. No one structure is best suited. Each one has advantages and disadvantages. You need to determine which one is applicable to your specific project. Again, in the lessons learned, each PPP project is specific. Yes, sir.
It's going to be hard for you to have a contract, even with the government, like third sector, like companies. Like if you want to have to build something, you have to have like a good, as they say, good CV to start. It's going to be hard at the beginning. Sometimes you're like going to have more customers. It should be more easy, but to have like a contract with the government here, that's hard.
I agree with you. It's always the first project the hardest. And we are facing it now. We are working with the State Property Government Authority, هيئة أملاك الدولة. وdefinitely أول مشروع هو the most difficult. This is the first time we are experiencing this project. But once you strike and you structure the first project and it becomes successful, the others will repeat the success. This project is one of the complex ones, considered one of the complex ones, because it's a build, operate, finance and transfer. So it's high in terms of the complexity. But also, I can assure you and give you comfort, in other government entities, like the Amanas, specifically منصة فرص, you see investment opportunities are put on this platform based on lease. Simple, being applied and successful. بعرف ونحن مشتركين فيه ونحن حضرنا عدة فرص لهم. Yeah, we are aware of it. Thank you very much. Any other questions?
For the past 10 years, we have seen that we have grown since the beginning of the month. Is there more inclination from international investors to get into these agreements, or still it's only the local investors that are engaging with the firm?
There is no other way to build the country without foreign direct investments. Yes, they will try to capitalize on the wealth that they have here, but foreign direct investments is key in developing the projects that they have. Yes, we started hearing, and actually we are receiving requests from our neighboring countries, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, Dubai. They want to enter the market. They see the growth in the market. And there's no other way other than implementing one of these structures and partnering with the government in Saudi Arabia. 70% again of most of the giga projects that is happening in Saudi Arabia are assumed to be funded by PPPs, either local investors or international. The majority will be international. Yes, Randa.
Rani, and from my short experience, I think one of the biggest hurdles that the PPP model is to have the investments on the bidders for it, to enter into the bidding process where you have to spend a million, 2 million, whatever sum of money you need to spend only to bid and potentially be completely out of business. And so this needs, if this can be tackled, I think you'll have a much, as a government, as a public entity, you'll have a much bigger success rate than if you are. So that's something that experience. The other thing is the long-term nature of the assignment or the time frame it takes from the preparation up to the submission of the bid and evaluation and the awarding is about at least a year. And so the risk allocation changes tremendously. So when you start on a certain basis, you end up on a different basis. And that creates a bit of difficulty at the end when you're trying to conclude. The basis is not always the same, especially when from the government perspective, because they start from a certain assumption and they're ending up on a different assumption. So is there a way to mitigate some of this other than a shorter time frame potentially?
طيب, first question first. The upfront fees invested by the bidders. We've seen it in power projects and water projects. Why it is successful there? They also go through a tedious tendering process. They pay for it. Not every bidder is successful. These are sunk costs. In real estate projects, I don't expect we run through this bidding process, the 1-year bidding process for each and every project. For projects that are small in size, that require less capex, we don't expect to run it through this process. This process is for the bigger projects, the billions. Investing 1 million, 2 million, and then being rewarded by $1 billion project, I think it is worthwhile. With respect to the second question, risk allocation again, preparation. The first phase before going and talking to the investor, here we need to spend quality time with the client, the government, and the consultants to do a proper risk allocation, to study the risks appropriately, to quantify these risks appropriately, and decide on which PPP structure we will be adopting. Because this will simplify the negotiation later with the bidder. From experience, the risk profiling, after you finish and you decide in the RFP and what is the risk allocation and what is the best PPP structure, I don't think it changes when you are talking to the investor. Khalas, you decide. But this is why, again, I go back to the first phase. Very important, prepare.
This is also related to the question. Energy sector, as you mentioned, is always the pre-qualification stage. That you only select the qualified partners that 2 or 3, maximum 4, but you don't go like, for example, in real estate projects, they invite 18 developers, 17 developers, big numbers, which is, again, cost in all of us.
100% كمان similar to the power projects كمان I put it in the process there is pre-qualification كمان رح زيدك من الشعر بيت we do letter of intents first we select specific real estate investors we share it with our client, we get it approved by the client, then we send them letter of interest. The ones that sends or responds with a letter of interest, then we send them an RFQ, request for qualification, so that we check these real estate investors or developers qualify to build this project. We run the pre-qualification, then we select the top qualified real estate developers. For these top qualified real estate developers, we send them the RFP or RFT, request for tender or request for proposal. It's not for entire. We are selective and we do this similar to the power and water. Any other question?
Can I go back to Rani's point? So I think the key issue here is bankability, as you mentioned. So the terms of the agreement are structured in a way whereby it allows the bidders to go and get a loan. And I think what's critical here is that the terms of the agreement have to compensate the bidders at least for the fixed costs, for example. So say it's a water contract or a business contract and it's structured in tariff is basically broken down to fixed versus variable components. The fixed part will compensate the bidders for the fixed fee, and the variable will fluctuate based on demand, and that way they can get more profitability as the variable component increases, but whatever happens, they have their fixed costs covered. So it's something that I think we see in typical power utilities. Successful.
100% هاني this is why in real estate we seldom find these offtake agreements. The project that we are working with is the government. We need the private sector to build an office building. The government is promising the private sector that it will lease the entire building. This is an offtake agreement in other ways. Taking this offtake agreement and sharing it with the banks, you can finance the project. So they are doing it, but not in all real estate projects. طيب. Any other questions? Thank you very much.